The Prime Mover is a somewhat typical Twilight Zone story about the danger of greed, but it separates itself in some big ways. Through a tale of telekinesis and gambling, we see a different ending than usual for a main character who acts this way. Also, we'll talk about how the credited writer, Charles Beaumont, based this script off another writer's story whose name was left off the episode due to a production error. Ace Larson works at a small-town cafe with his girlfriend Kitty Cavanaugh and partner Jimbo Cobb. After a car crashes near the building, Ace and Jimbo rush out to help the passengers, but the vehicle is flipped over. Surrounded by high voltage, the pair can't enter to pull them out. To the surprise of Larson, Cobb flips the car back over with his mind, and for the first time, Ace discovers that Jimbo has telekinetic powers. A frequent gambler, Ace thinks they can use Jimbo's powers to make the money they've always missed out on as poor restaurant owners. The trio travels to Las Vegas, where Ace wins hundreds of thousands of dollars with the aid of Cobb's gift. But when he refuses to stop gambling, Kitty leaves the hotel. Covering up his heartache and feeding his habit, Ace picks up a cigarette girl named Sheila and challenges Big Phil Nolan, the highest roller in town, to a game of craps. The problem is, Nolan is a dangerous gangster from Chicago, and because of overuse, Jimbo's powers may be running out. When you watch The Prime Mover, you'll see the end credits spell out that it's written by Charles Beaumont. While that's true to a certain degree, there's more to it. What was missing in those titles was an acknowledgement of who was the writer of the original story Beaumont's script was based on. With some of his ideas not working for a new episode, Beaumont reached out to his friend, George Clayton Johnson, to see if he had anything he could work with. It turns out, Johnson had a story that Beaumont liked called The Trouble with Teleportation. He paid Johnson $600 for the story and developed it into a script Rod Serling liked quite a bit. Beaumont changed a few things in his adaptation, including the title, but the basics were intact. George was set to retain story credit in the episode, however, because of an error through producer Buck Houghton, Johnson's name did not show up. Even on IMDb, they still don't have Johnson's name listed, which is kind of ridiculous. This is common knowledge among people who've researched the show. George himself had a commentary track on the Blu-ray set where he explains the situation in detail. There were no hard feelings, but it is a surprising oversight for such a writer-driven show. Speaking of which, this was yet another episode someone threatened to take legal action against Rod Serling for. They claimed the story had been stolen from a script sent into the show called The Powers That Be or Not Be. Serling shut the guy down pretty quick and no official action was ever taken. This became a common occurrence over the years, with a lot of people citing the vaguest of comparisons to state their usually flimsy cases. Richard L. Baer was back to helm his second episode of the second season, and he seemed like a good fit. There's nothing overly unique or flashy about this one compared to something like Third from the Sun or To Serve Man, but it's a solid chapter in his Twilight Zone filmography. I wish I could give him credit for the very impressive car crash at the beginning of the installment, but that was stock footage matched seamlessly with the scene of the two actors in front of a similar-looking wreck. The sequence was taken from the 1958 film Thunder Road, and it really got the action going here early on. What I can give Baer and the production team credit for are some of the telekinesis effects. From flipping the car over to levitating a bed, these stunts up the production quality a bit. The addition of a similar slot machine to the one used in The Fever and A Nice Place to Visit was also a detail I appreciated. While Dane Clark isn't written to be very likable in his role as Ace Larson, we do have another main character to feel a strong early attachment to with Buddy Ebsen's Jimbo Cobb. You may recognize Ebsen as Jed Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies. He played this kind of simple but noble role really well. We're made to feel the right mix of sympathy and admiration for the character as the story progresses. After Ace wins a boatload more money off of gangster Big Phil Nolan, thanks to a waning Jimbo, he decides to bet all his money on the next toss. Cobb tries to warn him to stop, but Larson doesn't listen and loses everything when the dice turns up the wrong number. Nolan takes the money and leaves Ace as poor as he's ever been. Jimbo mentions that he must have blown a fuse or something. His power no longer works. After a moment of disbelief, Ace comes back to reality, in a better state of mind for the loss. They return to the cafe where Larson rids the place of its one-armed bandit and proposes to Kitty. With the newly engaged couple's backs turned and satisfied with how things played out, Jimbo shows us that he never lost his powers. He just knew what was best for his friend. Rod reminds us of this moral as the story finishes on a happy note. Usually with a character like Ace, we'd see something bad happen to him at the end, some sort of comeuppance or twisted irony that ends up putting a player like that in his place. I guess that kind of still happens, but in a very different way. He realizes his mistakes and is better off for it. That was a nice change of pace for this kind of episode. Overall, there's enough here to give The Prime Mover a recommendation. It's not quite top tier, but the pacing, performances, and message make it a worthwhile episode. So float your remote on over, flip on the TV, and enjoy this high-stakes trip into the Twilight Zone.